Becky Burleigh. In 24 seasons at the helm of UF soccer, she has led UF to a national championship in, I believe, 1998, 2 college cups, and also 14 Southeastern Conference titles. So, Becky, thanks so much for coming on the program. Greatly appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure.
All right, so Becky, obviously, before we jump into the soccer aspect of the interview, we got to jump into this first with the coronavirus crisis. No end in sight. I know that you guys are probably, you will be having spring, not spring training, but spring games coming up in practice. And with that not happening, with the social distancing, how has that affected your spring season and also recruiting? Because it's, you can't really recruit. It's a lot tougher than with no travel.
Yeah, it's been very different, to say the least, but I think there's opportunity in it. Right now we're just trying to stay in touch with our team virtually, and we have some individual check-ins plus some team meetings. But in the end, I think maybe our players will come back really refreshed, both mentally and physically, taking a break that they might not otherwise would have had. So I think there's some positive in it too.
So with that going on, how are you telling your players to stay in shape during the crisis?
Be creative. I think it is tough. I mean, there's not a lot of gyms or availability of soccer fields or anything like that. So we've offered them the opportunity to have an app that gives you some different training sessions with a ball and a wall. We've talked to them about, we've sent them some body weight exercises. We do a lot of stability, so that's stuff that you can do on your own. I think our team is pretty resourceful, so I'm not too worried about them staying in shape.
All right. So let's move on to the soccer aspect. Growing up in Massachusetts and then moving to Florida, can you talk about that and also how you found love playing soccer?
Well, that's an interesting story because where we lived in Massachusetts is kind of central Western Mass, and it was pretty isolated. We lived on 27 acres, so there weren't a lot of kids near us. And so I never played soccer until I moved. But when we moved, ironically, we moved right across the street from a soccer field. And my parents wanted us to meet new kids. And so they signed us up for soccer. My 2 brothers played for a year or 2, but I just kind of fell in love with it and kept playing. So when I was 10, a little bit of a late start for me, but I spent pretty much all of my waking hours at that field.
So moving on to soccer, you played in college. I actually, you won't remember this, but in 2016, I went to one of your camps with the celebration team. You and Vic were running it. Savannah Jordan was there. So I did hear a lot about you, and you gave a lot of the girls that I was with a lot of good advice. And you talked about coming in after playing college soccer and playing at Barry College. Can you talk about that and how you got into coaching and then moving from there to UF?
Yeah, I have a very interesting path. It's not typical. So sometimes I hate to share it because it's so unrealistic. But basically what happened was I graduated from college in May. I became a head coach at Barry College in Rome, Georgia in June. I was 21, had no idea what I was doing. But luckily I had a very cooperative team and a good team. And that worked out pretty well, and stayed at Barry for 5 years before coming to Florida. And I loved Barry. It was beautiful. It was a great place to get my feet wet. And I had terrific support around me with the men's coach there was Brett Simon, who went on to coach at Stanford. The athletic director was Bob Pearson, who had been a soccer coach. So I was really lucky.
So talking about being in coaching for over 24 years at UF and even before that at Barry, what do you base your coaching philosophies on as far as that goes?
Whew, big question there. I think for me, we sort of have 3 core values that guide us. One is courage, and that's courage not only in the way we play, because we definitely take some risk and we ask the players to problem solve, but also courage in like interpersonal activities with your team. Sometimes it's important to have like a fierce conversation with your teammates and being willing to do that. The second one is team first, which is pretty self-explanatory, but making decisions for something greater than just yourself. And then the third one is growth. And we think about that, when players leave Florida, we want them to be a better athlete, a better soccer player, but also a better person that's equipped to take on the challenges of whatever they have next, whether that's professionally playing or whether that's going into their field or becoming a mom or becoming a wife, whatever relationships they end up in. We hope that being on a team has helped prepare them for that.
To go into coaching even more in depth with two more questions as far as that goes. With being at Florida the first 4 years, you won a national championship in the fourth year. You know, and you said that you had only been coaching at Barry College for a year or so before that. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. How did everything click so fast? You're going into a new program, and we've seen, you know, as a sports fan, colleges bring up new and different programs, and usually they're bad for quite a while, and they slowly build, and maybe they'll get to a playoff or the NCAA tournament as far as basketball or even college soccer goes. So how did you build UF so fast when they just had started 4 years before you won that national championship?
Well, to be fair, I think that's a testament to University of Florida itself and all the other athletic programs, because I knew when I interviewed for the job at Florida that they would be good and good quite quickly because of the reputation of all the other sports teams. And, you know, Jeremy Foley, our athletic director at the time, I mean, he gave everyone the resources they needed to be successful, including us, and especially as a new program. And the other coaches really helped cooperate in terms of, like, you know, the first year we're hosting recruits and we don't have any current team to host them. So other sports teams lent us their players and were gracious enough to give us some time so that our players could get to know UF through an athlete's eyes. And I really do feel like Florida was like a sleeping giant. Once they started soccer, I think everybody knew that they could be good very quickly just because of the reputation of the school and all the other sports.
So with that said, you've recruited a lot of great players. You look at Abby Wambach, Heather Mitz, Maggie Dorothy Howard, Savannah Jordan, Gabby Seiler. That's just to name a few. There's plenty of more great women's soccer players that have went through the program. When you're on the recruiting trail, what type of player do you really look for, and how do you get such great players, and maybe that you've molded them into great players throughout the 4 years that they've been with you?
Well, I think, like I said, UF really attracts a good level of student and athlete. But I think that what we look for is players who obviously have the skills that match up with what we try to do in terms of on the field, but also some of the intangibles, like how resilient are they when they make a mistake? What does it look like when their team isn't playing well? How do they interact with their teammates to make people around them better? And those things are harder to see like on a stat sheet, but if you go see someone live, you can see really good examples of all that stuff if you're looking for it.
So with the preseason, hopefully we'll start on time as far as that goes, and hopefully we can get rid of this virus fairly quickly within the next few months. And a lot of fresh new players coming in. How do you mesh all these different personalities together? Do you do a lot of team building, activities? How does that work when you're bringing that new team together with the season starting, you know, maybe a month afterwards?
Well, that is a challenge. We're pretty lucky that a lot of our players come in the summer, so they get a good bit of ability to be around each other a lot before our season even starts. But I think once the season starts, it's like trying to put the players in a position where they have to rely on each other to create that trust, trying to make them have interactions that go beyond the 2 hours of practice, and creating an environment where they can do that. And I think because we emphasize that so much in the recruiting process, that's no surprise for players when they get here that that's what our expectation is, and they're bought into it before it even happens.
So I want to move on to this question. I've did a lot of, you know, meeting you in person through in that 2016 camp, and also watching a lot of Florida Gators games on TV, ESPN, or even in person. I hear a lot about what drives winning, and you talk about that, and you co-founded that organization, conference, whatever you would like to call it. But how did you come up with that concept as far as that goes? Was it just through all those years of coaching that you kind of saw what works and what doesn't work with all the women that you have came through the program?
Well, I think what drives winning came as like a perfect meeting of two very different people. So me and my co-founder, Brett Ledbetter. Brett's a basketball background person. He had an academy for 5th to 12th graders in Missouri. And I actually went up to see him to look at some footwork that he was doing in basketball that I thought would have application to soccer. But when we started talking, we also discussed how he was taking his his clients into the film room and showing them clips, like kind of clips of whether it was professional athletes, coaches, maybe even just current clips of different things that were going on, and using it to teach. And I love that approach because I just thought it was so engaging. So I brought him down to work with my team at UF. Some of the other coaches really enjoyed what we were doing. And then he started coming to UF to work with all the sports here and have a head coach's collaboration once a month. And that just kind of spawned our conference. We're like, if we can do this with an athletics department, let's try to do it with, you know, coaches across the country. They might have some similar interests. And they did. And it kind of spawned this once a year conference, although we're a little in jeopardy of that happening this year. But
Right,
might maybe a virtual conference. But it's been a really interesting journey because I feel like I have learned so much based on just hearing all these thought leaders and amazing coaches talk about the way that they manage their teams, and I've been able to apply that to my team.
I want to go into this part of the interview as far as women's soccer issues. We hear a lot about equal pay on the soccer field, but also in general, as far as women getting paid, I believe it's 80 some odd cents on the dollar compared to men in general. We hear it a lot on the soccer field now with Megan Rapinoe. Abby Wambach was part of that when she was playing and still is, and a lot of other women, Alex Morgan too. As far as the equal pay, how do you think that is going? We just saw the U.S. men come out, and they are starting to support the woman, so that's a good start. Do you feel like the U.S. National organization will come out for equal pay in general? My thing is, I know you can't compare the women's team with the men's team, but I mean, the women's team kicks butt when they're on the field. I mean, they've won majority Olympic gold medals. They've won a ton of world championships. I mean, I just don't understand why they are not getting paid fair, especially because they're really kicking ass when they're out there. And, I am a guy, but the men's team basically stinks. Plain English.
Well, way to put it. You sound so New Yorker right there.
Rhode Island. I know you said Mass. I'm originally from Rhode Island and I'm
All
Italian.
right.
So that accent comes out a little bit sometimes when I get a little flustered.
Well, I definitely think that it's a complicated issue. I mean, it's not as straightforward as equal pay. But I do think that, the United States Soccer Federation, I think there's always been this feeling of, is the women's team as important as the men's team? And I completely understand on the world landscape that, men's soccer is a multi-billion-dollar business at this point. So I get the need for both teams to be good, but I would just say that, the women's team is not competing against the men's team for a World Cup. And so why pit them against each other? I think we just all need to be on the same side and supporting both teams the best we can and finding a way that the women feel like, they're being fairly rewarded for the work that they put in. Because when it comes to, the technical, the psychological, and the physical side of the game, the work that you have to put in for that is just as equal as it is on the men's side. And I think that's where there's probably been a little bit of a bad look on U.S. soccer when they started to try and say that it was different.
Well, Becky, there's also not a lot of talk, and we don't hear this a lot, about the sexism in sports. We look back at even the women's soccer team. They spoke about, wearing makeup. You have to pick the woman that looked the best. We see a lot of sexist stuff. So that's not really talked a lot about in sports. I know it's kind of a different subject, but just to kind of bring that up too. Do you feel that that's still a case that we still see a lot of sexist stuff in women's sports, compared to men's sports? We obviously don't see pretty much any sexism.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's inherently happening, whether here, I think the United States has been ahead of the curve in that, but certainly it's not non-existent. We had a player that just graduated a couple of years ago from Brazil, and they're doing a documentary called Warriors of the Beautiful Game on all basically the sacrifices that these women have had to make around the world in order to play soccer. And we take for granted, that we can go join our local team at our local club without any hassle. And I think that part was really eye-opening to me to see that, sexism still exists here. even though we feel like it's less than it is around the world, we're in a really fortunate spot to be able to play without fear of, anyone harming us when we play. That's not always the case everywhere.
Agreed. And we see that as in the Middle East, where they've tried to start some women teams and they haven't been successful because of the authoritarian regimes over there and all over the world, as you said. I want to talk about the growth of women's soccer. We saw in the WPS. I went to college down in Boca Raton. I got to see Abby play down there. Quite a few. Hope Solo also played down there. And at the Boca Raton team, they played at FAU at that time. Now it's switched to NWSL. We've seen a lot of togetherness with the MLS teams and NWSL teams, as where I am in Orlando, the Pride and also is formulated with the MLS, and also a lot of other teams have. Can you talk about the growth of women's soccer from now, from when you started playing compared to what it is now?
Oh, it's terrific. I love the fact that this NWSL league has been, a really good force for women's sports around the world as like a model. And back when I started playing, I remember the team that I joined when I was 10, it was the very first time that town had ever had an all girls team. And now, you can go to any town and there's multiple women's and girls teams. So I think it's definitely come a long way. It needs to continue to evolve because it's really difficult right now to play in the NWSL and have a living salary where you don't have to be doing something else outside of that or have support from families. Right. But at the same time, it took a long time for the NHL, the NBA, the NFL even to get to where they are now. So I think we just have to be patient and continue to pour into the growth of these professional leagues for women's sports.
Well, they just did that collective bargaining agreement recently, and it's, I'm talking to a couple of Pride players. They've said that it's gotten a lot better as far as, a lot of those girls, and I'm sure you know this from having so many pro players on your team, a lot of those girls had to live with, host families, not really the greatest situation as far as somebody that's supposed to be playing in a professional league and not making enough money to live on their own. But that's another story for another day. I want to talk about this. We look at club soccer in high school, and you deal with this with recruiting. And we hear this argument by a lot of coaches. And when I was in college and working with the women's team at my school, I heard a lot of my coach say that, they don't like to get a lot of girls that play high school soccer because it takes away from playing club, and a lot of them say that club is better. What do you think of that argument? Do you prefer women that play club instead of high school, or women that play both? Is that a problem because they have a better chance of getting injured? What is your take on that?
That's a good question. I think it really depends on each person's individual circumstances. I think that high school soccer offers something different than club. When you're playing high school soccer, you're playing with sometimes women that are 4 years older than you. You're also playing in a different dynamic where your entire school knows what's going on. At club soccer, it's like, your parents and maybe an occasional friend or two is going out to your game. But club soccer also has the ability to take kind of an all-star group and bring it all together in one team, whereas a high school, you're kind of dealt the talent you have based on your school districting. So I just think there's two different things. I always look at with our players that have played high school soccer, one of the big benefits is generally they've been one of the best players on their team and from an early age. So how do you navigate that socially, being one of the most talented players and one of the youngest players? And I think that's an important life skill. So for me, I don't mind either one. I just think they're different.
Can we talk and end the interview with a few questions about this? Last season, there was some positives and negatives. I know you guys went out against USF. Can you talk about the season? What did you feel like were the positives and negatives of that season?
Yeah, well, we were trying to bounce back from the year before, which was a really difficult season. And I think we made some progress, but obviously have a ways to go too. I think one of the things that was exciting about this year coming up, we were hoping to explore it more in the spring, but now we'll just have to find a more creative way to do that, was this rising senior class is a really great class that's very intent on being good leaders. And like I said, we were developing that, meeting once a month. And we'll continue to do that in some way. I'm excited about this year's group coming up too, that we have some very good young talent, but that young talent is going to need to be led. And that's where those seniors are going to really play a big role. But we've sort of started to take leadership away from an individual and maybe more into a moment. So like it's accessible to any player at any time. Like whoever's doing things right in that moment, they are the leader in that moment. And I think that has really helped our seniors and our older players see how important it is for them to model the right behaviors so that they can be those people in those moments.
Becky Burleigh, Florida Gators soccer coach here on Fire Breathing Rob. Becky, can you talk about the players and elaborate a little bit more about the players coming in? And who do you expect next year? I know you talk about the rising senior class to step up and really be a force next year. Maybe they weren't a force last year, but maybe they're looking better as far as stepping up next year.
Well, one player that, you know, we've never had really a full season is Deanne Rose. I mean, she's on the Olympic team for Canada. Sort of be interesting to see how it plays out now that the Olympics have been pushed back, because they would have been finished by the time we had started our season now. But she has been training really hard, been really getting better and better, and staying healthy has been the main thing. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we had a freshman that came in injured, Nicole Vernis, who we're really excited about. She started off the spring really well. And she didn't play at all last year because she came in with an injury, but she's healthy now, and I think people are going to be very excited. Cassidy Lindley had a terrific spring before it ended. She was really making progress in terms of her ability to demonstrate like a consistent work ethic every single day. That was fun to watch. I mean, she was a real force out there for us. And then we have some sort of, I think, unsung heroes like Maddie Alexander, who's a rising senior from Michigan, who's just probably was our most consistent player in the spring. So I think all around we've just got some exciting players to watch. And, you know, it's kind of lonely here without them. I told him yesterday on our Zoom call that I missed them.
Right, understandable. It is lonely everywhere. We're all kind of stuck in the house, or stuck in workplaces, or working from home. So it's sad. But as we end the interview, and Becky Burleigh, Florida Gators soccer coach, thanks so much for your time. Could you just tell the viewers where people can find more about you? Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and also talk. You know, I assume you're going to be, if the crisis is over, you're going to be having your camps with the teams again. Can you also talk about that?
Yeah, camps are pretty easy. Just go to floridagators.com. I'm on Twitter and pretty much all social media platforms just as @BeckyBurleigh. Not very creative, but simple. And then people who are interested in the What Drives Winning movement, that has a lot of great resources that are free, videos and things from different coaches of all different sports. And that's @WDW Convo, like What Drives Winning Conversation, WDW Convo. So those are 3 good places to check out some content.
All right, Becky, thanks so much for your time. Greatly appreciate it, and hope to catch up with you guys soon. And good luck during the crisis, and good luck next year.
Thanks so much. It was my pleasure.
All right, thanks.